To start today's lesson, we are going to review everything we've learned so far, because when we're working with rational numbers in today's lessons, decimals and fractions, we just use everything we've already learned, but now the numbers are slightly different. So starting with adding with the same sign, remember that we add the numbers and keep the sign. So if we have two positives, it's a positive answer. If we have two negatives, it's a negative answer. When we're adding with different signs, we subtract. Remember, we always have to subtract the bigger minus the smaller. And we keep the sign of the number further from 0. Subtracting, what we need to do is turn into addition. And to turn subtracting into adding, remember if we have 7 minus 10, it's really 7 plus negative 10, because minusing is the same as adding a negative. And if we have 6 minus negative 12, it's really 6 plus 12. And that's because subtracting a negative is adding a positive. So don't forget those rules. We also learned that when multiplying, a negative times a positive is a negative. A positive times a negative is a negative. But a negative times a negative makes a positive. And the same rules actually apply to division. Negative divided by positive is negative. Positive divided by negative is negative. But negative divided by a negative is a positive. Make sure that you don't mix up your adding and subtracting rules with the multiplying and dividing rules. We are going to use all of our rules from the first page, but apply them to fraction and decimal problems. Remember, when we are adding or subtracting fractions, they always need a common denominator. So do not forget that. Here my denominators are 8 and 5. They are different, but I know my least common denominator is going to be 40. So to get them both put over 40, and notice I'm doing this before I even look at my problems. 8 has to multiply by 5, so we have to multiply by 5 on top. 9 times 5 is 45. That fraction was negative. 5 multiplies by 8 to make 40, so I multiply by 8 on top. 3 times 8 is 24. And also notice that that fraction was negative. And then we just go back to the rules from the first page. Here in this problem, we are adding, and we are adding things with the same sign. They're both negatives. So what we do, add our numbers. So 45 plus 25 is 70. So we have 70 40ths, and keep the sign. They're both negative, so my answer is negative. And because it's a fraction, we have to make sure we reduce. I know they're both divisible by 10, so I have negative 7 over 4. If you would like to make it a mixed number, it would be 1 3/4 negative. However, I prefer to leave my answers as improper fractions, but that is up to you. Our next problem has decimals. So when we look at this, it's negative 2.7 minus 4.2. So we have to use our subtraction rules. Subtracting is the same thing as adding a negative. So I have negative 2.7 plus negative 4.2. In this case, we're adding with the same sign because they're both negative numbers. So we add the numbers, 2.7 plus 4.2. Remember, we line up our decimals when we are adding or subtracting decimals. I get 9, 6, decimal comes straight down. We keep the sign, negative 6.9. Moving on to multiplying and dividing. If we look at this, we are multiplying fractions. So to multiply fractions, remember we go straight across. But make sure to be watching your signs. When I multiply straight across, I have negative 8 times negative 4. Well, I know a negative times a negative is a positive. So negative 8 times negative 4 is really positive 32 over, and then we multiply my denominators. 3 times 6, I know is 18. I then have to think about, can this reduce? And yes, because they're both even. So I'm going to start by dividing by 2. 32 divided by 2 is 16. 18 divided by 2 is 9. They cannot reduce any further, so I can leave it as this. Or you can make it a mixed number. It'd be 1 and 7/9. Doesn't matter which one you have as your final answer. But remember, notice these are positive answers, because a negative times a negative is a positive. So make sure you're always watching your sign. Multiplying decimals, we need to make sure we're being careful with this rule as well. 5.8 times negative 1.6. We have a positive times a negative. I know my answer is going to be negative. So if I think about my answer, it's going to be a negative number. Then I just multiply how I always would. 5.8 times 1.6. To multiply, we do 6 times 8, which is 48. Put down the 8, carry the 4. 6 times 5, which is 30, plus 4 is 34. When we move on to the next number, we put down our 0 placeholder. 1 times 8 is 8. 1 times 5 is 5. Then we go ahead and add our numbers together. 8, 12, and 9. And we have 2 numbers after the decimal. So that means I need 2 numbers after the decimal in my answer. 9.28. My final answer is negative 9.28 because of what we said earlier. Our next problem is moving into dividing fractions. Remember, dividing fractions, K, C, F, keep, change, flip. So, I'm looking at my signs first. I kind of like to do that and have my answer bubble ready to go. We have a negative divided by a positive. I know my answer is going to be negative, so I put that in my answer bubble right away. And then I move into KCF, keep, 2/5. Change to multiplying and flip. Because I already know my answer is negative, I'm ignoring the sign momentarily. That's a personal preference. If you want to carry your sign through the problem, you can. Now we go ahead and multiply straight across. 2 times 4 is 8. 5 times 6 is 30. This can reduce by 2. And we get 4/15, which will go into my answer. Negative 4/15. And lastly, we have division of decimals. Because we cannot use a calculator, this is going to be long division. In my answer bubble, I think about my sign. Negative divided by a negative. I know it's going to be a positive. Put a little plus to remind myself you don't need to do that. And then I just have to think about my long division. When I set up long division, the first number goes inside my box. So, I have to now ask how many times can 56 fit in a 340? The answer is 6. 56 times 6 is 36, 33. So we have 336. When we subtract, we got to borrow, and we get 4. So I add a 0, bring it down. 56 does not go into 40, so it's 0 times. Add a 0, bring it down. 56 fits into 400 7 times. 56 times 7, 42. 35 plus 4 is 39. It's 392. When I subtract, I get 8. I can add a 0, bring it down. This problem actually does not divide nicely. So anytime we're doing long division, especially on your assignment, if it's not working out well, do it to 4 decimal places. But we're going to stop here. My answer would be 0.607. And it's about that much. So you put that little squiggle line. Draw it a little more clearly. About 0.607.